I didn't think the end of my marriage would start with a phone call from a lawyer. Not my lawyer, not even our lawyer. Her lawyer. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk, answering emails, doing what I always did, keeping things stable, predictable, normal. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. I wish I had. "Is this Emily?" the voice asked. "Yes," I said, already uneasy. "This is Mr. Harrington. I represent Kimberly and her husband Edward." The names hit me like a sudden drop in altitude. Kimberly. A woman I hadn't met, a woman I barely knew, a woman my wife hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. He didn't waste time. "I'm calling to inform you that your husband, Rachel, has been arrested for harassment, cyberstalking, and defamation." I remember the room going quiet. Not literally, but the way your ears ring when your brain refuses to process what it's hearing. Arrested. For a moment, I thought he had the wrong number, the wrong name, the wrong life. My husband worked part-time at a dental office. He complained about coworkers. He watched cooking shows. She watched cooking shows. She asked me what I wanted for dinner. She was difficult sometimes, sure, but criminal? Then he said something I'll never forget. "We've traced everything back to your home internet connection." That was the moment my stomach dropped. Because suddenly, this wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about intent. By the time I picked Rachel up from the police station that night, I already knew something was deeply wrong. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. She was angry, but not scared. Angry at them. Angry at Kimberly. Angry that she'd been caught. Over the next few weeks, I learned the truth in pieces. About fake accounts. About anonymous emails. About lies carefully crafted to destroy another woman's business and marriage. I learned that my savings, our savings, were gone. I learned that my wife didn't regret what she'd done. And slowly, painfully, I learned the most terrifying truth of all. The man sleeping beside me was capable of spending years trying to ruin someone else's life, and felt completely justified doing it. That was when I started asking myself a question I never thought I'd have to ask. If she could do this to her former best friend, what would she do to me? I'm Emily. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the kind of person who believed that if you work hard and keep your head down, life eventually becomes stable. Not perfect, not fair, but manageable. I work in IT. It's not glamorous, but it's solid. Steady salary, steady hours, the kind of job where you solve problems quietly and get used to being the person everyone relies on when something breaks. I've always liked that. I've always liked being dependable. Rachel used to like that about me too. We met 11 years ago through mutual friends. She was bright and funny in a way that pulled attention without even trying. She worked at a dental office back then too, part-time, front desk, sometimes assisting. She wasn't chasing some big career ladder, but she had this warm, social energy that made everything feel lighter around her. On our first date, she talked for 20 minutes about a ridiculous customer who tried to pay for a cleaning with coupons that expired 5 years earlier. I laughed so hard I almost choked on my drink. She leaned forward, eyes sparkling, like making me laugh was a kind of victory she enjoyed. I fell fast. And Rachel made falling feel safe. She told me she valued loyalty above everything, that she hated fake people, that she didn't do drama, she just cut people off when they betrayed her. At the time, I thought that sounded strong. I didn't understand yet that sometimes I cut people off isn't strength. Sometimes it's a warning sign. Still, we built a life that looked good from the outside. We were careful with money. We didn't live beyond our means. We paid rent on time. We had a routine that worked. Rachel would come home from work and kick off her shoes by the door, then wander into the kitchen like she owned the place, stealing a bite of whatever I was cooking, complaining about her feet, telling me little stories about her day. I'd listen, half smiling, half tired, happy in a quiet way. We didn't have kids. That wasn't a sad thing. It was just how it turned out. We talked about maybe someday, but we were always saving for something first. A better apartment, a better car, a house. A house was the big dream. We'd built a solid emergency fund. We were planning to buy a place next year, something in the suburbs, a small yard, enough space that we wouldn't feel like we were living on top of each other. We'd even started browsing listings the way couples do when they're trying not to get their hopes too high. Rachel would send me photos, kitchens, patios, walk-in closets, and write, "This one feels like us." And I believed her. The only thing that ever felt like a shadow in our marriage was how Rachel talked about one person, Kimberly. It came up rarely at first, like a bad memory you joke about once in a while. Rachel would roll her eyes and say, "Kimberly always thought she was better than everyone." Or, "She was never really my friend." Sometimes she'd say it with a laugh, like she didn't care. Other times, she'd say it with a tightness in her jaw that didn't match the casual tone. I asked once, early on, what happened between them. Rachel told me they'd been best friends in high school, stayed close through college, and then it blew up over a guy named Kevin. She explained it like this. She dated Kevin for 6 months. She got suspicious he liked Kimberly. She broke up with him. She told Kimberly she was fine with Kimberly dating him if she wanted. Kimberly eventually did. Then Rachel confronted Kimberly and said she'd failed a loyalty test. Rachel said, "A real friend wouldn't date your ex, even if you gave permission." I remember sitting there, absorbing it, trying to be supportive. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You accept their version of their pain. So I said, "That sounds messy, but it was a long time ago." Rachel nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. She said, "Some people never change." I should have paid attention to how she said it. Not sad, not reflective. More like certain. Over the years, Kimberly became one of those names that showed up only when Rachel was stressed or insecure. Like a button that, when pressed, made Rachel sharper. If Rachel had a bad day at work, Kimberly's name would appear like a ghost. If Rachel saw someone on social media living the life Rachel wanted, she'd mention Kimberly in the same breath, as if they were part of the same category. Women who get everything. I still didn't think much of it, because I didn't understand what I was standing next to. I thought Rachel had an old grudge that would eventually fade. I thought my job was to love her through it. Then, about 3 years ago, Rachel ran into Kimberly at a grocery store. Rachel came home that day, different. Not angry exactly, not crying, not dramatic. Just off. She was on her phone more than usual, thumb moving too fast, eyes narrowing like she was reading something that irritated her. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "Nothing." But the nothing had edges. That night, she barely ate. She picked at her food, staring at her screen between bites. When I tried to talk to her, she gave me little half responses that didn't land anywhere. "Long day?" I asked. Work stuff? Kind of." I remember the way the light from her phone screen turned her face pale in the dim living room. She kept scrolling like she was hunting for something. And when I leaned over her shoulder, just naturally, not even thinking, she tilted the phone away. It was subtle, but it was the first time in our relationship I felt like there was something she didn't want me to see. I should have asked more questions then, but I didn't, because Rachel was my husband, because we had 11 years, because we were saving for a house, because I believed in the version of her I married. So I let the moment pass. I told myself it was nothing. And that nothing became the crack everything else would split through. After the grocery store incident, things didn't explode. They shifted, quietly, gradually, the way water changes temperature without you noticing until it's already too hot. Rachel didn't suddenly become cruel or volatile. She became absorbed, distracted in a way that felt new. Her phone was always in her hand, always tilted just enough that I couldn't see the screen unless I was standing directly over her shoulder. She started staying up later than me. I'd go to bed around 11, the way I always had. Rachel would say she wasn't tired yet, that she was just scrolling or watching something. I'd wake up at 2 in the morning to the faint glow of her phone lighting the ceiling, the soft tap of her thumbs moving faster than casual browsing. "Everything okay?" I asked once, half asleep. "Yeah," she said too quickly. "Just can't sleep." I believed her, at first. Then the comments started. They were small, easy to dismiss. Rachel would mention Kimberly's name casually, like it had just popped into her head. "I saw Kimberly posted another one of those perfect photos," she said one night while we were eating dinner. "Must be nice not having real problems." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "You still follow her?" Rachel shrugged. "Everyone follows everyone. It doesn't mean anything." But later, I noticed she didn't follow Kimberly from her real account. She followed her from others. I didn't know how many. I didn't know why. I just knew that sometimes when Rachel talked about Kimberly, she knew details that felt too specific. "She's always posting about her business," Rachel said one evening, voice tight. "But I guarantee she's missing deadlines. People like her always do." "How do you know?" I asked. Rachel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I can tell." That smile unsettled me. Rachel began analyzing Kimberly's life like it was a puzzle she couldn't stop working on. She'd screenshot posts, zoom in on captions, reread comments. She'd say things like, "Notice how her husband didn't comment on this one," or "That house looks nice, but I bet they're drowning in debt." It felt obsessive, but also strangely methodical. Like she was building a case. At the time, I still framed it as insecurity, as old wounds reopening, as something that would pass once the novelty wore off. I told myself everyone has moments where they fixate on someone from their past. But then the fixation turned active. Rachel started talking about Kimberly's work. Kimberly had started a small graphic design business working from home. Rachel scoffed at it openly. She calls herself a business owner now, Rachel said one afternoon, rolling her eyes. Anyone can make a logo and charge people online. You don't know that, I said carefully. Rachel shot me a look. Why are you defending her? The question landed heavier than it should have. I'm not defending anyone, I said. I just don't think it's worth this much energy. Rachel pushed her chair back and crossed her arms. So now I'm not allowed to talk about things that bother me? That was new too. This sense that any boundary I suggested was an attack. After that, I stopped pushing. Rachel's phone habits escalated. She'd sit on the couch for hours, barely blinking, scrolling through Kimberly's posts and her husband's posts like she was watching a slow-motion car crash she couldn't look away from. One night, I walked into the living room to grab water and saw Rachel rapidly switching between screens when she noticed me. What are you doing? I asked gently. She snapped her phone face down on the table. Nothing. Why? Just asking. She sighed loudly. You're acting weird lately. That comment stayed with me, because I wasn't the one hiding screens. I wasn't the one lying awake at 2 a.m, cataloging someone else's life. But Rachel made it feel like I was the problem for noticing. Then came the lies. Small ones. Practiced ones. Rachel said she'd heard through a mutual friend that Kimberly was struggling with clients. When I asked which friend, she waved it off. Someone from college, she said. You wouldn't know them. Another time, she claimed Kimberly's marriage wasn't as solid as it looked. I heard they fight a lot, Rachel said. From who? I asked. Rachel looked annoyed. Why does it matter? Because it matters when someone is building a story without evidence, I wanted to say. But I didn't. Looking back, I realized that was the period where Rachel crossed a line inside herself. From watching to participating. From curiosity to control. I just didn't know it yet. Because what I didn't see, what Rachel made sure I didn't see, was that she had started creating fake accounts. Not one. Several. She followed Kimberly under different names. Different profile pictures. Different identities. She watched quietly at first. Then she began interacting. Nothing obvious. Just likes. Occasional comments. Enough to feel present without being seen. And then, when that wasn't enough, she escalated. Rachel created a fake LinkedIn profile. She chose a neutral, professional name. Uploaded a stock photo. Listed a believable background. A recruiter role. A company that sounded real enough that no one would question it. She contacted Kimberly. Claimed to have a job opportunity. Kimberly responded professionally. Politely. Cautiously. Like any business owner would. And when Kimberly shared her email address, Rachel crossed from digital obsession into deliberate harm. I didn't know any of this while it was happening. All I knew was that my wife was becoming someone I didn't recognize. More irritable, more secretive, more convinced that she was right and everyone else was wrong. The house felt tense in a way I couldn't explain. Conversations clipped, silence heavier. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that we'd talk it out, that whatever this was, it would pass. I didn't know that while I was telling myself that, Rachel was already setting fire to someone else's life. The day everything collapsed didn't come with warning signs. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation, no moment where my intuition screamed something is wrong. It came disguised as a normal workday. I was at my desk, halfway through troubleshooting a system issue, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice. Something made me answer. That decision split my life cleanly into before and after. Is this Emily? The man asked. Yes. This is Mr. Harrington. I'm an attorney, representing Kimberly and her husband Edward. The name made my stomach tighten, but I still didn't understand why he was calling me. He spoke calmly, professionally, like this was just another file on his desk. I'm calling to inform you that your wife Rachel has been arrested this afternoon. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was impossible. I think you have the wrong person, I said. My wife works at a dental office. There was a pause, not awkward, measured. We're very sure, he said. She's been charged with harassment, cyberstalking, and defamation. The evidence is extensive. My throat went dry. He continued, laying it out piece by piece, like he was assembling something I couldn't yet see as a whole. Fake social media accounts, anonymous emails, messages sent to Kimberly's clients claiming she was unreliable and unprofessional, a campaign that had gone on for over a year. I remember gripping the edge of my desk so hard my fingers went numb. That can't be right, I whispered. Rachel wouldn't. We traced everything back to your home internet connection, he said gently. IP addresses, login records, email metadata, it's all documented. That sentence landed differently, because that meant this wasn't an accusation. It was a conclusion. He told me Kimberly and Edward had suspected someone was trying to sabotage them, that they'd tried to ignore it at first, that clients had started quietly dropping Kimberly without explanation. Then came the email to Edward, an anonymous message claiming Kimberly was cheating. Specific dates, specific times, detailed enough to feel real. Edward showed it to Kimberly immediately. They checked calendars, phone records, travel receipts. Every single date listed, they'd been together. That was when they went to the police. The investigation didn't take long. Rachel hadn't hidden anything. She hadn't needed to, because in her mind, she wasn't doing anything wrong. I left work early. I don't remember telling my manager why. I don't remember the drive to the police station. I just remember sitting in my car in the parking lot, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the building like it belonged to someone else's life. Rachel came out an hour later. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She looked irritated, like someone who'd been inconvenienced. "They're blowing this out of proportion," she said as she slid into the passenger seat. "You won't believe the lies they're telling." I waited for the panic, the remorse, the fear. None of it came. On the drive home, she talked nonstop about how unfair it was, how Kimberly was always dramatic, how Edward was probably controlling and insecure. "She's always been like this," Rachel said. "Vindictive. I knew she'd do something like this eventually." I pulled into our apartment complex and turned off the engine. "Rachel," I said slowly, "did you send those emails?" He scoffed. "Of course not. I was just trying to warn people." That sentence felt like ice water. "Warn them about what?" I asked. "About who she really is." I looked at the woman I'd been married to for 11 years and felt something fracture inside my chest. That night, after Rachel went to bed, I opened our laptop. I don't know what I expected to find, but I found everything. Dozens of fake accounts, draft emails, screenshots saved into folders labeled with Kimberly's name, spreadsheets tracking posts, dates, client interactions. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was systematic, calculated. I sat on the living room floor until dawn, scrolling through evidence that my wife had spent years trying to destroy another woman's life. And when the sun came up, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't married to someone who'd made a mistake. I was married to someone who believed he was right. The morning after I found everything, the apartment felt unfamiliar. Same walls, same couch, same coffee maker humming in the kitchen. But the air was different, thicker, like something toxic had been released, and I was breathing it without a mask. Rachel woke up late. She walked into the kitchen in her socks, hair messy, acting like this was just another Tuesday. She poured herself coffee, leaned against the counter, and said, "You look tired." I stared at her, not dramatically, not angrily. I just looked. "I didn't sleep," I said. She shrugged. "Me neither. Jail lighting is awful." That was when I realized how far apart we already were. I told her I'd seen everything. The fake accounts, the emails, the spreadsheets. She didn't deny it. She didn't even look ashamed. Instead, she sighed like a teacher dealing with a slow student. "You weren't supposed to find that," she said. The words landed wrong. Not "I'm sorry," not "I messed up." Just, "You weren't supposed to know." "Rachel," I said quietly, "you tried to destroy her business, her marriage." She scoffed. "I did not destroy anything. If their life fell apart that easily, it was already broken." My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed calm. "You lied to her clients. She deserved it. You accused her of cheating. She's manipulative. Edward needed to see that. You stalked her for years." Rachel slammed her mug down on the counter. "Stop saying it like that." "Like what?" I asked. "Like I'm some kind of criminal." The word hung between us. Criminal. She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Kimberly involved lawyers and police. That tells you everything you need to know about her." That was the moment something in me went cold. Because I understood then. Rachel wasn't confused. She wasn't remorseful. She wasn't spiraling. She was convinced. Over the next few weeks, reality arrived in waves. First came the civil lawsuit. Kimberly and Edward's lawyer laid everything out with brutal clarity. Lost clients, documented income damage, therapy bills, investigator costs. The judgment wiped out our savings. Every dollar we'd carefully put away for a house. Gone. We took a loan against my 401k to cover legal fees. I watched numbers disappear that represented years of discipline and planning. Rachel didn't cry. She complained about how unfair the judge was. Then came the criminal sentencing. 200 hours of community service, 2 years of probation, a restraining order barring her from contacting Kimberly or Edward in any way. When the judge read the conditions, Rachel leaned over and whispered, "This is ridiculous." I felt my stomach drop. At home, the tension was constant. Rachel paced. She ranted. She replayed everything in loops, always landing on the same conclusion. Kimberly ruined her life. When I asked her why she did it, really did it, she said, I was protecting Edward from her true nature. I didn't argue anymore. I just listened. And the more I listened, the more afraid I became. Because Rachel talked about Kimberly the way someone talks about an enemy, not a former friend. Someone to be punished. Someone to be corrected. Someone who deserved pain. I started sleeping in the guest room. At first, Rachel acted offended, then annoyed, then angry. She asked, when are things going to go back to normal? I didn't have an answer, because normal was gone. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I married, would never have done this. And the woman standing in front of me now? I didn't trust her. Not with my money, not with my reputation, not with my safety. And the most terrifying thought of all crept in late at night when the apartment was silent. If she could plan this much harm for someone she hated, what would stop her from doing the same to me if I ever became the problem? That question stayed with me, and it changed everything. I kept hoping, quietly, stupidly, that something would break through to Rachel. That community service would humble her, that consequences would force reflection, that being this close to losing everything might finally make her stop and think. For a brief moment, it looked like it might. Rachel started her community service 3 weeks after sentencing, Saturdays and Sundays at a food bank across town. She complained at first about the hours, about how early she had to wake up, about how the work was beneath her skill level. I didn't argue. I didn't engage. I'd learned that any disagreement turned into a trap. Then she started talking about a woman named Janet. Janet was in her 60s, retired social worker, a regular volunteer. Rachel said Janet was kind, that she didn't judge her, that she treated her like a person instead of a criminal. I noticed a shift. Rachel seemed calmer, less sharp. She came home one afternoon and said, almost thoughtfully, some of the families there remind me of how things were growing up. That caught my attention. It was the closest she'd come to self-awareness in months. She even stayed late a few times to help Janet organize donations. She talked about the food bank's programs, about how complicated poverty really was. I let myself hope. That hope didn't last. The phone calls started quietly. I'd come home from work and hear Rachel's voice drifting from the bedroom. Low, quick, cut off the second she realized I was there. When I asked who she was talking to, the answers didn't line up. Janet. No, someone from work. Just a friend. Rachel had never been secretive like that before. Not once in 11 years. When I pushed gently, she snapped back hard, accusing me of being controlling, paranoid, invasive. You're not my warden, she said. I backed off, but something inside me tightened. Then the call came. Kimberly's lawyer. He sounded tense this time. Kimberly has been receiving phone calls, he said. They hang up as soon as she answers. Different numbers. Same city. My chest went cold. She's worried Rachel is violating the restraining order. I told him the truth. I didn't know anything about the calls, but I would address it immediately. When Rachel came home that evening, I confronted her. She denied everything. Too quickly, too aggressively. Said the lawyer was lying. Said Kimberly was trying to get her thrown in jail out of spite. When I pointed out the risk, jail time, probation violation, Rachel exploded. You're supposed to be on my side, she yelled, not theirs. That was when I realized something crucial. Rachel didn't see this as a legal boundary. She saw it as an obstacle. She stormed out that night and didn't come back until after midnight. The next morning, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I called her probation officer. I told him about the calls, about my suspicions, about Rachel's behavior. The officer didn't sound surprised. He said he'd investigate. He warned me that if Rachel was involved, the consequences would be severe. When Rachel found out what I'd done, her rage was volcanic. She accused me of betrayal, of choosing strangers over my own wife, of trying to ruin her life. She packed a bag and left to stay with her sister. 5 days later, the probation officer called me back. They had evidence. Rachel had been using apps and services to mask her number, calling Kimberly, calling Edward's workplace, hanging up before speaking. She had violated the restraining order. Again. Court was scheduled for the following week. Rachel texted me once. She said she wanted to come home and talk. I didn't respond, because by then the question wasn't whether our marriage could be saved. It was whether staying any longer would destroy what little of myself I had left. The lowest point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came with silence. Rachel was gone, at her sister's place, while I sat alone in the apartment that no longer felt like mine. The guest room bed was still unmade. Her shoes were still by the door. Everything about the space felt suspended, like life had been paused mid-breath. I went to work. I came home. I ate because I had to. But inside, I felt hollow. Every night, my mind replayed the same questions on a loop. How did I miss this? How long had this been there? Was any of it real? When Rachel appeared in court for violating the restraining order, I watched through a screen in the hallway. She looked smaller in the orange jumpsuit, but not remorseful. The judge didn't hesitate. 6 months in jail. I didn't feel relief. I felt grief. Not for the marriage as it was, but for the marriage I thought I had. That night, I sat on the floor of the living room surrounded by boxes of paperwork, legal documents, bank statements, emails from lawyers. Every piece of paper represented a consequence of choices I hadn't made. I thought about the house we'd planned to buy, the yard, the kitchen Rachel used to send me photos of, the future that had seemed so close. All of it was gone. I cried then, not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that soaked into my sleeves while I sat with my back against the couch. I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was losing my sense of reality. Because when you spend 11 years loving someone, you build your identity around that truth. You tell yourself, I chose well. You trust your judgment. And suddenly, I didn't. I started questioning everything. Every argument where Rachel said someone else was the problem. Every friendship that faded because she didn't like them. Every time I took her side without asking harder questions. The thought that haunted me most was this. What if this didn't start with Kimberly? What if this was who Rachel had always been, and I just hadn't been the target? I slept maybe 2 hours a night. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I imagined Rachel getting out of jail angry, vengeful, convinced I had ruined her life. I pictured her turning that obsession on me. That fear settled deep in my bones. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. My voice shook as I explained the situation. The arrests, the lawsuits, the jail sentence. The lawyer listened quietly, then said, "You're doing the right thing." I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was standing in the wreckage of my own life, trying to decide what pieces were still safe to touch. But for the first time in months, I also felt something else. Clarity. Rachel wasn't going to change. And staying wouldn't save her. It would only destroy me. The turning point didn't come from Rachel. It came from her sister. Amy called me 2 weeks after I filed for divorce. Her voice sounded hesitant, like she wasn't sure whether she should be making the call at all. "I found something," she said, "and I think you deserve to know." We met at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. Amy brought a worn cardboard box with her, taped, dented, clearly old. She kept her hands on it like it might disappear if she let go. "These were in my garage," she said. "Rachel asked me to store some things years ago when she moved apartments. I forgot about them." Inside the box were letters, handwritten, neatly folded, dozens of them. They were from Rachel to Kimberly, high school, college, years before I ever knew Rachel existed. I started reading, and the ground shifted beneath me. Rachel wrote about Kimberly the way someone writes about a rival, not a friend. She talked about how Kimberly was prettier, smarter, more popular, how teachers liked her more, how boys noticed her first. There was resentment on every page. Then I reached the letters about Kevin. Rachel admitted she never cared about him, that she dated him because she knew Kimberly liked him first, that it felt good to win. When she broke up with him, she encouraged Kimberly to date him, not out of generosity, but because she planned to use it later. The loyalty test wasn't emotional. It was premeditated. Rachel wrote about setting traps, about proving Kimberly was disloyal, about finally having proof that Kimberly was the kind of person who deserves consequences. I felt sick. Amy was crying when I looked up. She said she'd never known, that Rachel always told everyone Kimberly became stuck up and abandoned them. That Amy believed her. "These letters," Amy whispered. "This isn't the sister I thought I had." In that moment, everything snapped into focus. The stalking, the obsession, the lack of remorse. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a pattern that started long before me. Amy told me she was giving copies of the letters to Kimberly's lawyer, that they might matter in the civil case, that she felt responsible for not seeing the signs sooner. I drove home in a fog. That night, I went through the apartment again, this time with different eyes. I found printed screenshots, hundreds of them, social media posts, comments, photos, labeled, sorted, organized. Spreadsheets tracking Kimberly's routine, gym times, grocery stores, date nights. I sat on the floor, surrounded by proof, and realized something terrifying. If Rachel hadn't been caught, this could have escalated, far beyond emails. That was the moment fear gave way to certainty. I wasn't abandoning Rachel. I was escaping her. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel guilty for choosing myself. The fallout didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments. Court dates, phone calls, emails, each one severing another tie between the life I had and the life I was walking into alone. Rachel appeared at the divorce hearing via video call from jail. Seeing his on the screen felt surreal. She looked thinner, paler, still defiant. Her lawyer argued that her actions were the result of mental health struggles, that I should be supporting my wife instead of leaving her when she needed help. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. My lawyer spoke for me. He pointed out that Rachel had refused counseling when her parents offered to pay for it, that she had continued harassing Kimberly even after arrest, sentencing, and a restraining order, that I couldn't help someone who refused to take responsibility. The judge listened. The divorce moved forward. Kimberly and Edward's lawyer used Amy's letters to establish a long-term pattern of harassment. The court approved an extended restraining order, 5 years instead of 2. It included Rachel's family, preventing anyone from passing messages or information between them. Amy told me she understood why. Rachel didn't. She accused me of ruining her life, of abandoning her, of siding with enemies. But the truth was already written into court records. I moved out of the apartment before Rachel was released from jail, transferred the lease into her name, packed only what was mine. Leaving felt quiet. No confrontation, no last conversation, just a door closing. I took a job in a different city, 300 miles away. A clean break, higher pay, new apartment, no shared memories in the walls. Starting over was harder than I expected. Some nights I lay awake replaying everything, wondering how many warning signs I ignored, how many people I'd pushed away because Rachel told me they were bad for me. So I reached out. Old friends? People I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them answered. Some admitted they never liked Rachel but didn't want to interfere. Others told me stories I'd never heard. Times Rachel spread rumors, made inappropriate comments, quietly tried to damage reputations. Her behavior with Kimberly wasn't unique. It was just the most extreme version. Rachel tried to contact me after her release, through friends, through family, through guilt. Amy told me Rachel claimed she'd learned her lesson. When Amy asked what that lesson was, Rachel said she just wouldn't get caught again. That answer closed the last door in my mind. Kimberly and Edward sent a letter through their lawyer. They thanked me for cooperating, for reporting the probation violation, for helping stop the harassment before it escalated further. They'd moved to another state. Kimberly's business was recovering. They were rebuilding. I was glad, because for the first time, this story wasn't still hurting someone. It was ending. The divorce was finalized 2 months later. No celebration, no sense of victory, just a quiet certainty that it was over. I'd been living in my new city for 3 months by then. A small apartment, neutral walls, furniture I chose myself. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. For the first time in years, my life felt uncomplicated. Rachel tried to reach out again through mutual acquaintances. I didn't respond. My lawyer advised me to keep strict boundaries, and for once, that advice felt less like legal strategy and more like self-preservation. Amy kept me informed, even though I didn't ask her to. Rachel was back at the dental office, struggling financially, telling her family that I'd abandoned her when she was sick. When Amy pressed her, asked what she'd learned, what she regretted, Rachel couldn't articulate anything beyond how unfair everything had been. That told me everything I needed to know. I started rebuilding slowly. I joined a hiking group, took cooking classes on weekends, things Rachel used to dismiss as pointless or expensive. I reconnected with old friends, people who laughed easily, who didn't make me feel like I was constantly defending my life choices. The financial recovery has been slow, painfully slow, but it's steady. I drive an older car. I'm rebuilding my emergency fund. I'm learning that stability isn't about how much you have. It's about how much chaos you don't live with. Sometimes I think about the woman I married, the version I thought she was, and I let myself grieve that, not because it was real, but because I believed it was. I've learned to pay attention now, to how people talk about others when they think it doesn't matter, to patterns, not apologies, to whether someone takes responsibility or just shifts blame. Most of all, I've learned that love doesn't require self-erasure. If someone's peace depends on your silence, it's not peace. It's control. Kimberly and Edward are building a new life in another state. I'm building mine here. Rachel is still telling her story the way she wants it remembered. I don't need to correct her. The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs distance. And for the first time in 11 years, I trust myself again. That's enough.